And then Carrie's going to talk about computing, and then we'll have lunch, which will be great too. So I think we have quite a diverse experience level of population here, which is great. So I think some of this will identify with a little bit of hopefully all of you. So if you've ever run an analysis before, you might have been really excited to send it to your collaborator, and that would be great. And then maybe you sent it to them and they tried to run it and a lot of chaos ensued, a lot of errors, a lot of confusion that may have led to a bit of an email vortex where you're like, well, it was working for me. Why isn't it working for you? Confusion, a lot of time spent. And this is kind of one of many effects of the reproducibility crisis that folks talk about. And even if your collaborator did get it working, sometimes this is the problem, is it the result just gets a little bit different. And as scientists, obviously, this is not what we want. We want to know that the results we found are the results we found, because the rest of science is built on that. So let's talk about reproducibility and what it means. So repeatable is kind of the foundation of a lot of this science. And that just means like within our same hands, if I ran an analysis on Monday and I rerun it again today, will I get the same results? Same code, same data, same everything. And reproducibility is built on that. So if my results are not repeatable, if me with the same code and the same data and the same me cannot get the same results, it's not repeatable, so we can't move on. But if it is, then maybe I can send it to my associate and they can try to reproduce my results. So again, for reproducibility, in computation senses, we're talking about same code, same data, but a different person is now going to run this. And that's important because this is where we really start to expand the results that build on science, right? Replicability then is if we use new data, do we get still kind of the same concepts? Are we building on the same concepts that we saw when we reproduced those analyses? So we build a little pyramid here, which is that things first must be repeatable. Then next, we need to be able to reproduce it if we send it to our lab mate or collaborator. And then if it's not reproducible, we can't move on to other types of data or other concepts. So this is, all of science is built on this, and yet it still comes down to some very technical things. So in the long run, reproducibility saves everybody time and effort. Here's a couple other motivational reasons for reproducibility. If you've ever tried to come back to code again, it really doesn't take long. I mean, this person's gray-haired from now to the future, but even sooner than that, you might find, wait a second, this ran for me last week and it's not running now. That is also a reproducibility problem. And also, it's a scalability thing. If your code works for you, but it doesn't work for anybody else, guess what? Now you might have 10 other collaborators who are trying to redo what you've done. And if they can't, that's a lot of time spent. Whereas if you kind of pick up a lot of these reproducibility techniques, it can save a lot of folks' time. So reproducibility is a tortoise's game in that classic story. It's an incremental and slow process because it is a whole skill set, but I'm going to tell you that it has very high payoffs. Because science is a community effort. Each of us are contributing a domino when it comes to the scientific flow of information. And it's also iterative work, right? Don't get overwhelmed by the fact that, like, yes, your analysis didn't run the same today as it did yesterday. That's something that we can all build skills on, and that's part of what these workshops are for. So perhaps you start over here on the left where you ran it once, but by building these skill sets, hopefully you get more and more to the right where your code and your analysis is going to run more reliably in more contexts. So I'm going to give you a quick tale of two different differential expression analyses that were both done by me. And I'm just going to let you kind of get the vibes of these analyses and see which you think you feel better about. This is the first example. Here's a bunch of files. Here's what the files look like. That's it. I have no idea. Even though I did this, I have no idea what software was used. Where would I go to start if I wanted to rerun this? I have no idea. And this is not to shame anybody. You know, this was me. I also did this. This was 2013 Candace. She did things. She did her best. But this is just to say that this is a skill set. And as we kind of go along the path, hopefully we're learning a little more. This is also a differential expression analysis done by me. As you can see, the files are a little less overwhelming. There is a README. We'll talk about those. But it also specifically shows not only what software packages were used, but how to install them and how to run. There's actual code. I can see all the steps. I would feel much more confident in this analysis. And so I'm not saying that this analysis is perfect either, because again, it's a continuum. But the idea is we want to continually move toward more understandable, more transparent analyses. And that's what reproducibility is about. However, a disclaimer that reproducibility is not the same as correctness. You could be consistently wrong in the same way. We hope you're not. That would be a bummer too. But reproducibility means consistently. It does not mean correct. But if you are inconsistent, you can't be correct either. So anyway, that's just a little thing. So this is my main tips for reproducibility. There's 6 of them. We will talk about 2 of them today. We'll talk about containers, which is the 3rd one tomorrow, an ad nauseum amount of detail for there. It'll be great. And then the 3rd day, that's tomorrow. And then the 3rd day, we're going to cover some of the other stuff real briefly. We don't have time to give you like specifics, but as you have maybe heard, and also Carrie will tell you more later, we have all kinds of online courses that can take you into more detail for any of these concepts. Before we get into that, metadata, super important, crucial, in fact, and they're often overlooked. And it's also very important for reproducibility. What are metadata? Anything and everything that should be known about your samples, your sample data. And it can include all kinds of categories. What is this from? What patient or organism is this from? What are the demographics? What are the disease, treatments, time points, processing information? This is just to bring our awareness about how important metadata is for computational analyses. We always have to have this disclaimer. It's very, very important for us to know that if we have protected data types, because we need to protect the humans that are part of this research, that you also should know, be very careful about your metadata, that it is probably loaded with that. This is a really excellent paper I love. So please click on that link that talks about data organization in spreadsheets. So I refer you to look at that. It gives great tips. I love it so much. All right, let's talk about those first 2 tips for reproducibility. So why is documentation? So first of all, write it down. I should go through these tips. First is write it down. We're going to talk about that in a second. Organize and reorganize. So that's important because if you can't find the file you need to reproduce, that's going to be tricky. Managing computing environments is about containers. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, but basically the idea that if we picked out anybody's laptop and another person's laptop in this room, your computing environments are not the same. Like I can guarantee, even if you have the same operating system, you're like, well, we both have Macs. There are so many things that have been installed with and without your knowledge that if you run an analysis again, you are very unlikely to get the same results. And there are papers that show that is the case. Having everything publicly available, that's not only a reproducibility thing, it's a transparency thing. Having things open source whenever possible, anything that, of course, you see this asterisk that doesn't violate IRB privacy or ethical data handling guidelines. Having others look it over, that's another thing we're talking about. If you want someone else to reproduce your analyses, guess what? Having someone else tell you how your analysis is or isn't understandable is a great step to take. And then this one's kind of our more advanced step. It's talking about automating things. So there's a thing called continuous integration, continuous development. We're going to talk about that more. Don't worry about it at this point in time. Let's dive into write it down, which is my first advice, which is really just my chill way of saying documentation is important. So a usable, well-documented analysis, more likely to be used and disseminated. So if you would like other folks to cite your work, which most folks do, you should have a lot of great documentation. And we have courses to teach you that. Because the flip side is, I don't know if you've been in this situation where you really wanted to use a tool so bad, and then its documentation or lack thereof made it so you were just like, I don't have time to continue down this road. I have to switch. The good news is the Chime 2 folks have put a lot of work into making really nice documentation. So they're a good example of this first one. And so that's all of what we're striving for is, well, good documentation that everyone wants to shout from the rooftops how great it is. What are types of documentations we need? READMEs. I gave you a little preview that I was going to talk about READMEs. They're great. Basically, your TLDR of analyses, right? Too long, didn't read. I didn't go through all your code. I don't have time to go through all your code. But if you have a README, that is out in my brain. I'm like, oh, I know I need to go exactly right there right now to get a quick rundown of everything. So the README should include background knowledge, usage info, software requirements, and also just basics about where is stuff in this project. So this is a little cartoon to explain this, but READMEs, this is good for you to know if you are new to analyses and didn't know what those README files were. But whenever you download some files, if you see a README, go right there. That'll help you and save you so much time and effort. The other thing is code annotations. Code annotations are so important because just because you think your code is clear, you in the future or your collaborators now might not also think it's as clear because you know stuff that they don't. So code annotations are helpful for explaining historical decisions, explaining quirks of the code, saying where more development is needed, as well as summarizing the goals, right? Because it's all about knowledge transfer. Quick note that there are some really helpful AI tools out there. These are some chatbots, some large language models that are really helpful. The main thing I want you to know, though, is that you should use AI tools that are trained for the task you're trying to do. So this table is really, we've gone through these and other tools to try to give you kind of an idea of what's good. So that's a resource for you to look at. So Find is the one that is more trained on code. So if you have a chatbot you need to use, I recommend using that. So they can be really good at telling you what historical or confusing code is doing, because often we have been passed down code from our predecessors in a lab or someone, and we're trying to figure out what it is. Here's some other AI coding assistants. I'm still trying to look into some of these. I've mentioned Find or Find. Codium is also got free. It's also got a plugin, which is kind of nice. These ones, however, are not free. So anyway, just some options for you to look into. We're going to wrap up today's reproducibility talking about organizational schemes. So goals for an organizational scheme. You want it to be project oriented. It should be consistent. That makes sense. It should be easy for you and others to find the files quickly without needing to be briefed on it. It should minimize the likelihood for errors. You don't want to accidentally overwrite your raw files. That would be bad. So keeping things kind of separate like that. And it should be something that's maintainable. And by that maintainable comment, I mean, we can think of things as being on this continuum. You can tell I like talking about continuums when you see my lectures. Over here, we have chaos reigns. Nothing can be found. That's obviously not a good way to live. That's going to be stressful, right? Like this is not, we can't find what we need. We can't even do our work. But on the other hand, like, I am amazed at seeing this little Post-it thing of like, they very perfectly put each individual Post-it, like, that is letting the organization rule you instead of having the organization help you. So finding something that works and you can maintain is so important. And then here is a quick rundown of some organization tips. So using informative names, that's not only helpful for code, but it's also helpful for files, right? Like, using names that aren't TMP and aren't a single letter. That's great. We'll talk more about code later. Numbering scripts in the order that they're run. So here I have an example project that you can see. And so just by looking at this, you can hopefully tell that in this analysis, 00 comes before 01. That's like an intuitive thing you can see from a distance without having looked at any READMEs, right? Keeping like files with like files. So results and raw data should each be their own folders. That helps everybody so you don't accidentally overwrite your data. A central document like a README. We already said how important READMEs are. I'm going to say it again. And then dates and files, like your computer keeps track of when you last modified stuff. So I used to have a file back when I first started in informatics that was called 100% up to date log, which was probably almost never 100% up to date. So, name something that like will actually help you and not make more work for you. That's all. And then lastly, it's really helpful to have a central script that can run the whole thing. The less number of steps that you can tell your collaborator they have to do in order to reproduce your analysis, the better. Like, yes, is your analysis reproducible if it has 100,000 steps? Yes, but is it practically reproducible? Not really, because that's going to take a lot of time for your collaborator to rerun. My last thing is just like, don't be afraid of folders. Folders are great. And I think they can help things a lot. because then mentally we're not like so overwhelmed by all of the files. And then the rest, you're going to be left in suspense until day 3. So that's basically it. So now I'm going to have Carrie, she's coming up here and she's going to talk about computing.